Reclaim is a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter, with your host, Thais Sky. Together, we will explore the questions of what does it look like to reclaim our sovereignty, our worthiness, our voices as women in this messy world. No topics are barred as we offer roundtable discussions on life, spirituality, politics, and what it means to be a woman in the modern age. Let's do this. Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday. Thais Sky here, your host of Reclaim. I am sitting in my closet, and I am recording this on Monday, so yesterday. And I am just feeling super excited about what's happening in our country right now, and a little bit relieved because, I think when we think of government, when we think of our president, they feel almost untouchable. Like no justice can ever be served at that high level. Everything is so corrupt. Everything is so fucked up that there's nothing's going to happen. But we have a hero. We have Mueller. And Mueller is fucking saving the day. And his indictment yesterday to Paul Manafort brings hope. It brings hope that there's going to be an end to the Cheeto regime, right? There is hope that we are going to slowly get out of this fog that the American people have been living under, and we can start actually retaining or reclaiming, reclaiming our democracy. One of the people that I follow pretty avidly when it comes to what's going on in politics and discerning the news in a way that is digestible and understandable is Elizabeth Cronis McLaughlin, or as we call her, ECM. Elizabeth is a mentor of mine. She's actually going to be on the podcast in a couple of weeks, which I'm excited for. And since she started doing Resistance Lives in January, she has amassed over 30,000 followers, listening to her every word around what's going on in our country. And I highly recommend you connecting with her on Facebook. You're listening to her Resistance Lives. She has a Patreon page now that you can support. All of the links to that will be in the show notes for you. She's a real solid resource and information portal to what's going on in the country. And listen, we have a long way to go, right? And maybe you're starting to sense in this podcast that we do have a lot of corruption in our government and white supremacy in our government, and that's been the case since inception. Our country is not the greatest country in the world. In fact, our country is often steeped with very violent rhetorics and laws that diminish humanity because of the color of one's skin or because of their socioeconomic status. We have a long way to go. But getting the Cheeto off of the presidency is an important step. And then we have to really address what put the Cheeto in office in the first place. Every white person in this country is responsible for upholding white supremacy unless you're actively dismantling it. That's the way our system lies. Race is a social construct created in the United States. It's within our laws. It's within our systems. And it is of absolute importance that we look at that. And we will. We will. This podcast will look at that. We do not look away from anything. Yeah? Okay. First, before we get even another sentence deeper into this podcast, I want to thank those of you who have been leaving me rates and reviews on iTunes. Y'all know how much that means to me. It means the world. This is an individual effort by me in my closet. I do everything for this podcast. I edit it. I do all the interviews. I do all the scheduling. Right now, that's all on me. And I'm doing it with total love for this project. And the way that you can support me right now is by leaving a rate and a review. It's how iTunes algorithm works. It's what gets more people listening to the podcast. Social proof is important. And so if you're listening to this and you want to see this podcast succeed and flourish, please leave a rate and review. Let me read a few of them that have been left for me. This is by Jamarama Ding Dong. Oh my God, these handles are the best thing ever. 15 minutes into episode 1, and I want to say thank you. You're articulating all of my reluctance and ickiness within the industry. Lifts my spirits to feel like there's others committed to bringing some realism and a global view to this work. Thank you. I'm looking forward to hearing more. I really believe we are on a precipice of a new evolution, and it's through channels like these conversations, the forging of these connections, that we will create something incredible. Whew, I agree. I do think that we are on the precipice of something new. I think we have to keep having these conversations, huh? This is by Kay Numba. Thais is such a powerhouse. She knows exactly how to navigate the hard conversations without sugarcoating, but also comes from a space of curiosity and learning. This is one podcast not to miss. Thank you, Kay. And then we have Heather. Heather shares, grateful for Thais and the incredible important conversations she is holding with the incredible guests and for the necessary voice she is offering to the world. I am so happy that this podcast is resonating with all of you. Like I said, it's a labor of love. And again, if you want this to continue, please, please, please support me right now through, doing the rate and review thing on iTunes. Okay. Before we get into Isabel's conversation, I want to share with you another resource that I have been really, really marinating on. It is a book called Conflict is Not Abuse by Sarah Schulman. The byline is Overstating Harm, Community Responsibility, and the Duty of Repair. I am thoroughly enjoying this book, and even just the title alone, Conflict is Not Abuse, I've been sitting with that. And I've been sitting with the conversations that I often have with my clients around trauma and around trauma response, and how a benign situation can be interpreted by the unconscious mind as a sign of danger. And so something minor happens, a minor infraction, your boss says something, your parents say something that is super not a big deal, or it could be an actual conflict, but it's not to the escalation of an abuse, and yet we internalize it and respond to it as if it were abuse. And there's a danger in that, because when we're responding to the level as if it were abuse, we're reacting and we're escalating the conflict beyond being able to actually have a conversation and a dialogue and work through things. Right? If your partner says you're ugly and you throw them out of the house, you are no longer able to have healthy conflict resolution. And conflict resolution is an important part of being human. And so to me, this book and this conversation that I've been thinking about a lot really accents the importance of doing the deeper wounding and trauma work, and understanding how our reactions are actually based on memories, they're based on automatic response, they're based on unconscious experiences. That is actually not what is really happening. Just because you think something, just because you feel something, does not make it true. And I know that in the spiritual community, we often say, well, it's an intuitive hit, or I feel this way. And because we want to honor our feelings, we immediately go, well, then if I'm feeling this way and I'm a very intuitive empath, it must mean that this is what's happening. And I invite you to consider that that's actually not the case. Your feelings go through the unconscious mind before it goes into your intellectual prefrontal cortex understanding of the world. So there is a space for emotions, and I do a lot of work with this because I totally believe in the potency of our emotions for our healing, and I want to make sure that we are not escalating every single conflict to the level of abuse. I was having this conversation with my partner this weekend. A couple years ago, when we were doing the long-distance relationship, he was having a weekend with his friends. His friends had flown from Delaware to be with him. They were in Vegas. They were having a time of their lives, and I felt abandoned. I felt like he wasn't making time for me. I felt like he was going to leave me. Now, if a third person were to look at the situation, they would say, actually, he is absolutely radically in love with you. He's just preoccupied right now with his friends. This is temporary. They're going to go back to Delaware soon, and you'll be able to recommence, the way that things were before the friends arrived. But to me, on a very deep level, I felt abandoned. I felt wounded. I felt unlovable. And he triggered all of my wounds. Now, I escalated it to a level of him abusing me. And I responded and acted and behaved as if he actually abandoned me. And you can see that when that happens, we actually push people away. We actually perpetuate our wound. We recreate the same pattern that we've been falling in for a long time. And we overstate harm. because now it's going to be so much harder to repair that relationship. It's going to be so much harder to have a engaged conversation about what happened. And there is a way to have those conversations. And it's actually important to be in conversation with our loved ones, with our partners, with people in our lives about what we need from them and when they hurt our feelings. But when it's escalated to the response of abuse, it removes people's sovereignty and ability to respond to you, right? Because now you're acting from a place of trauma. And so I had to do the work of stepping away, going to my therapist, unraveling my abandonment, feeling into it, noticing it, honoring it, understanding that that's what was even happening in the first place. And then I was able to come back into the relationship and say, listen, I overstated the harm here. What you did was not abuse. Something actually very benign, just a misunderstanding of my expectations of what was going to happen while your friends were there. And I am ready to have this conversation and to let you know what I need and for you to let me know what you need and for us to create a game plan for the next few days while they're still around. Do we see that? So the idea that conflict is not abuse is an imperative understanding of the construct of trauma and understanding that if you are escalating every conflict as abuse, every conflict as you're abandoned, you're bad, you're wrong, it's a great opportunity for you to know that there's some unaddressed wounding there. And this is all calling your attention. And it's time to deepen your understanding of yourself. Okay, so 2 resources for you that I've been really digging this week. Elizabeth Kronis-McLaughlin and Sarah Schulman's book, Conflict is Not Abuse. Both will be available in the show notes, as well as some deeper resources to support you in understanding to a deeper level the conversation that I have with Isabel. Now, Isabel and I talk a lot about consent. Isabel is a consent educator. In fact, let me pull up her bio right now. Isabel's bio says, Consent Culture Radical Educator and Consultant, Dissident, Artist, and Transgressive Storyteller, Sanctuary in Birth, Sex, and Death. I found Isabel through Facebook, actually through the Confronting Whiteness series that Rachel Rice hosted, which I will also add to the resources. Rachel is a dear friend of mine. I found Isabel through her work. I connected with her on Facebook, and Isabel's way of writing and sharing her information is extremely potent. And in the year that I've been following her, I've been learning a lot from her on how to navigate an understanding of expertise while also honoring the lived experiences and the sovereignty of others. And one of the things that Isabel talks a lot during the conversation that we have is the idea of gaslighting. And this may be a new concept for you. So I want to quickly educate you on what gaslighting is. Gaslighting is a term that came out of a play where a husband slowly started to turn the lights down in their house. And every time the wife questioned it, like, it doesn't seem darker in here, he would make her feel like she was crazy by denying her observations and basically saying, no, you're crazy. There's nothing going on. And then I think at the end of the play, he kills her. Gaslighting, though, is not often that overt. In fact, oftentimes it's extremely subtle, and it's basically us just denying people's observations and experiences. If someone says to you, I feel this way, and we say you have no reason to feel that way, we're gaslighting them. When someone says, this is my lived experience, and you say, well, that's actually not my experience, this is my experience, we're gaslighting them. There is a way that you can hold both to be true, but anytime that we deny someone of their reality, or we tell them that it's just their experience and not the actual experience, we're holding truth over them. And we're denying them of that reality. We're denying them of that truth. And that is something that we just do not want to be doing. As a coach, it's my priority that my clients begin to know and trust themselves. And so if I were to be gaslighting them subtly, right, by saying, you have no reason to feel that way, that's not what's happening here at all, then what I'm doing is making them distrust themselves. And that's ultimately what gaslighting does. It makes people with less power question themselves, and it makes people with more power continue to maintain that power. So there's a lot of power dynamics at play with gaslighting, but it can happen in any situation, in any conversation. And it often happens when we want our reality to be true. We don't want to actually face the reality of other people. And you can see how problematic that is, because just because it's your reality does not mean that it's the truth. So Isabel's going to go deeper into gaslighting. And as you're sitting and listening to our conversation with Isabel, I want you to be thinking on consent, dissent, victim shaming, and transparency. I want you to be thinking questions like, how do I respond to dissent on my Facebook page? Have I ever victim shamed? Do I transparently share what's going on in my life and in my business? Have I unintentionally gaslighted someone and made them question themselves? And how are the ways that I am perpetuating rape culture within my circles? Hello, Isabel. Welcome to Reclaim.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So I'm so excited to be engaging in this conversation with you. You are someone that I deeply admire. Your ability with words is just phenomenal, incredible. I mean, you are a true artist, and I really admire your perspectives and thoughts and analysis on this idea of consent. And I've never really thought of consent until you've made me think of consent. And now I see it everywhere. And so I want to gift the listeners a widening and expansive experience into the topic of consent and what does it mean to live in a more consensual relationship, world, dynamic, culture, et cetera, et cetera. So why don't we start the conversation with you sharing, how do you define consent? Like, what does consent look like for you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say it's an important question to me, and a big one, right? Because it's actually quite broad. I think oftentimes for a lot of folks, consent is a word that's normally used or first often heard and used in sexual context.
Yes.
So it might come up in like a university, they'll do like a intro, right? Sort of in their welcoming. And then when they're sort of talking about different factors, then often consent ed is a piece of what happens your first year of university. Sort of exploring what yes is, what no is, and how that actually coincides with university policies over assault. So it gets linked then to sex, to sex acts, to sexuality. I would say it absolutely includes sex. And it is not exclusive to at all. And it's somewhat foundational, or I would say a way of engagement or a way of being, and plays itself out in things that can look more transactional, right? So asking, is this okay? Checking in, is this something you're willing to do? All of those things, as opposed to making an assumption or as opposed to taking. And so it can come out in transactional ways, and I view and hold it also as a way of being, or a modality of way of being in the world, which is to check in with self, respect bodily integrity as well as sovereignty. Is this what I actually want to be doing? Do I have a yes to this? And in that, in really being able to locate oneself there, not doing things out of obligation, social conditioning, which we're always coming up against. Also then realizing that if we were to locate fully in that, it humanizes, I believe, in a way that asks us to really consider the humanity of others, and really begins to challenge and question the multitude of ways that we intentionally or unintentionally violate others and their consent by going in, making assumptions, and or sometimes outright taking, such as cultural appropriation.
Yes, and that's what I've been seeing and unpacking this past year with your words and your presence, is starting to question how I'm taking away from people's sovereignty and how that is actually consent. The conversation of consent applies to how we navigate every relationship, and not just the sexual ones, not just the overt ones. For example, in Brazil, we tend to touch everybody and everything, and we have very close personal space. And to learn that in this culture, in this way of operating, it's actually very invasive to people for me to touch them without their explicit permission, and that's just physical body sovereignty, not even emotional sovereignty or intellectual sovereignty.
Yeah, I think culture plays a large part in it, which is that there's differences, right, in terms of what would be considered normative ways of engagement, as opposed to being something we might look at and the collective in the room might have a negative response to. And that changes, right, from place to place, even like within subcultures. And I would say it still remains worth interrogating a bit power dynamics that are also playing out. So consent is also it's about structural violence too. So there are ways in which we can say, yes, as the group or the collective, we have all collectively agreed to something and said, yes, this is our way of engagement. And did everyone actually have a say? Did everyone actually get a yes? What is the cost or consequence if you were to dissent and say no? Who has power, right?
Yes.
And so I'm do a lot of work, I would say, on the individual level with others and with myself, or what does it mean to, again, check in with ourselves and with others? And I think the conversation can't happen outside of looking at larger structural violence. And so is the environment itself, is the culture, when we talk about consent culture, is the culture itself continually highlighting agency and creating the context in which it can even exist. So there's a dismantling piece that has to happen as part of any work, I believe, around consent. And we limit it when we keep it only as a one-on-one interaction. And so I know many people, even as you were saying, are like, yeah, I really like to touch people and I'm really super close and affectionate, which is a lovely way of being human in the world and can look really different depending on the culture you're in and the context you're in. And so one question to ask in that is where's the power in that dynamic and who has it? And if I have a lot more power, then that needs to be addressed before making a claim that someone can just say yes or no if they don't want it, because that actually is not entirely true statement itself, given the underpinnings of the dynamic. And I know many get hesitant around even having the conversation because what feels tedious, right, to people is do I have to ask every single time? Right? And I don't want to live afraid of people and afraid of doing it wrong and afraid of messing up and afraid and all of those things. So I think it's also worth having as the backdrop to the work itself and to any conversations, which is sort of a humility that we likely will. I think we'll get it wrong.
And not a centering. I feel like that's the main concern where we're constantly worried that we're going to mess up. It's because we're thinking about ourselves and we're thinking about our ego or our shame or our emotions, how we present to the world, versus actually leaning into and feeling into, well, actually, what is this person's experience like and what is my relationship with that? So what inspired you to be so knowledgeable on consent, or maybe not inspirational, but what in your life kind of navigated you to have such a deeper understanding of consent?
I would say many factors. I would say, and I know I'm not alone in this, that I had significant and repeated violations of consent from a very young age. So I have a trauma history surrounding that. And even in that, sometimes speaking of it's difficult because consent didn't exist as a concept. It wasn't that I even knew I could say no and then the no was violated.
Right.
And in a protest that way, it just was, the ground we walked on. And I would say absolutely, I had a no. My body had a very clear and complete no to what was going on. And it was complicated, right? In all the ways that then through the years, questions of, and fears, I would even say, of being complicit in some of what went on, and like, did I participate in all? It gets really messy, right? Really quickly when you start really engaging with it. So that's sort of in many ways where it began. And again, I know that's true for a lot of people. Even I watch it play out with my own son in the ways I parent, and constantly watching and I think, wow, yeah, this actually is complicated. I really do want to respect his sovereignty. I absolutely want to be with him and teach him in the world in a way that he doesn't assume he can take whatever he wants whenever he wants.
Yeah.
And it's complicated because there are times when I absolutely know I have overridden and said, I don't care, we need to get ready or do whatever. So I know its origins itself, that's where it begins for most of us, and is often complicated. In my work, it came up again and again. So I have sort of three different aspects that I've done a significant amount of my life's work in, and one of them is in birth work, so midwifery, and as a doula, as well as in palliative care and end of life care as a death midwife, and then as a sex educator and working as a sex workers' rights organizer. So consent is sometimes spoken of. Often in medical context, it's only do you sign consent for actual medical procedure? And that's the context in which that word is used. And again, I would say just experiencing and witnessing again and again and again the way we are socialized to defer to authority.
Yeah.
And who that actually gives power to and who that protects. And so I became deeply interested in questioning a lot of the normativity around the ways that we do things and relating to the body, right, in medical environments and in socialization over the narratives we even tell about what pregnancy is, about what birth is, and then specifically within sex in the context of that, and questions over, do sex workers even have rights, and is consent I've heard say consent is not even allowed in that conversation because you're already saying yes.
Yeah.
As opposed to consent being contextual.
Right.
And not a blanket statement. So it would come up repeatedly in the work I was doing and became more and more prevalent to me that it was both where I wanted to devote myself, my time, and the work I do in terms of educating, and that any conversation I had sort of crept back towards it, simply because I live in an authoritarian culture.
Yeah. I hear this a lot. We live in a rape culture. We live in a non-consent culture. And so if it is embedded in our culture that we don't even understand our own sovereignty, it is very hard for us to even know when it's being violated. And so then I see a lot of self-blame. Like, that was my fault. I asked for that. I took that on as myself, because we don't even understand or have the language to say, actually, you have a right over your body, and look at the ways that we treat not just women in our culture, but the land in our culture, right? Even at the very beginning of our country, it was on raping and pillaging this earth. So then it's no wonder that hundreds of years later, we are still feeling so unsure of what can we say no to. Yeah, that's what I've been sitting with a lot. Like, how do we even know that our consent is being taken away if we are so in that mask, in this cloud of being so accustomed to this just being a culture, this is just the way it is, right? How do we even know that we have a right to say no?
Yeah,
right?
Yeah, no, exactly. Because I would say it's absolutely cultural. So even if you're going to speak of rape culture and the language we use around that, right? So we have the act itself of sexual assault and raping someone, and that happens in a context which has normalized violence of that nature.
Yes.
And has normalized gendered violence. So it doesn't mean they're the same. It just means it's happening in a context in which it becomes, I would say, yes, more difficult to see things at times until it reaches something that feels really stark, such as assault in that way, the actual physical body, right, is assaulted and violated, and then it somewhat becomes clear. But the context is something that has normalized, and in that made it more permissible.
Yeah.
Right, and that we see it in all kinds of structural harm and violence and in systems themselves. To say simply that awareness is the answer, I would say it's one piece.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that seeing things is important. And sometimes, once we see, it's difficult to unsee. And I think there's a lot of value in that. And I would say it is one of, because it is larger, right? We are dealing with larger systems and culture. It is one of those pieces that I'm very aware of. I will give my life's work to and won't complete.
Mm.
So it's big.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
play that again on all these really intimate things, like some of the most intimate acts I will experience in my life, right? Such as physical intimacy and sexuality with another human being, such as giving birth. Like I will experience it in these very intimate ways, and it's actually so big. Again, it's the ground that we're walking on that, as you said, is stolen.
Yeah.
That's how big it is. So giving oneself to the work of what does it mean to take acknowledgement of my own personhood, the sovereignty of that, as well as the ways that then I have infringed upon others, is a life's work that we don't complete, and we can play our part in changing the culture deeply. I do deeply believe that. It's not going to happen overnight, and it doesn't mean that it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That's what I would say. So absolutely, awareness. And then I think becoming a questioning person
Yes.
is one of the largest aspects for me. And that's true of the desire to create consent culture, and then this rape culture you're speaking of, but even authoritarian culture, right? Just become a questioning person. Which doesn't even mean you have to always know the answers, but constantly questioning, how did this come about? Why are we doing it this way? Who benefits from it being this way? Who is excluded? Always entering into something with questions, I think, can create an openness that allows sometimes for just a little bit of space to shift something, and some of the light to turn on.
Yeah.
Over, am I operating from the way I've been socialized, which is inevitable, or is this something that I actually hold as a value of mine?
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely think that has been my biggest unfolding this past year, is in questioning everything. And it started by me questioning last October, November, beginning to question the things that we've taken for granted in the coaching industry, because this is the industry that I operate in. And there are so many facets and elements of the coaching industry that are based on dogmatic beliefs that you just don't question. That is just the foundation of the culture. And I've begun to question that, and I began to ask myself, who is it excluding, and how does it ultimately feel? How did it feel for me? So why am I now perpetuating, outside of myself? And one of the big things that has come up for me is this idea, that what I'm experiencing must be what everyone else is experiencing. Like, because this has worked for me, it's now going to work for everybody. And I see you do that so differently. I see you taking a stake to the space of, this is my experience, and I am in no way, shape, or form telling you it has to be in any way, shape, or form your experience. And I think that's such a great way to begin to question the industry, is just by saying, you know what, this is the way it is for me. I don't actually expect you to take this on as what's true for you.
Oh yeah, I hear that so much, and really the importance of it. Right? Like I think a lot of unintentional violence that happens in making those large statements as if they are universal.
Yes.
And again, that can actually harm others because it doesn't apply, and it claims that one, at least how I hear it sometimes when I'm listening to it, is that it's claiming that one arrived at that place because they earned it or worked towards it.
Yes.
That sort of enlightenment, because I got here because I worked for it or I earned it, and now therefore I can illuminate. And I think that in and of itself, right, can be really harmful, not even understanding different starting places, all that one brings in to any moment, like their entire lifetime in the much larger systems that they live within. So the sort of, if I can do it, you can do it too.
Yes.
Model, right, that you're talking about. I disagree, and I also think it can actually be harmful. Taking responsibility for our own experience can be super powerful. I think we're allowed to have whatever experience we're having. regardless of how it feels. It's ours. It belongs to us. And I think of the individual, the personal work is actually really mirrored in the ways of engagement with others, which is just sort of a refusal to gaslight.
Yeah.
Myself and therefore others. I can even disagree, but that's different than not believing.
Yeah.
So if this is your experience, I actually do believe you. Likewise, I'm going to believe myself and not override something, which is normally a social conditioning voice. That I'm having an experience and it seems to be other than what's happening over here. And so I can come into an internal war, internal conflict right around that. Or like, I don't know, maybe I don't understand my own experience and all the voices that then happen. And beginning to shift that, which is, this is my experience. I'm allowed to have it. I will not pathologize it. It too is part of being human.
Yeah.
And then what does it mean to then extend that to others? Can be quite spacious, I think, and a really pleasurable way of engaging, to really have a deep rooting in one's own orientation that then actually makes more space for others instead of requiring conformity.
Yeah, that's exactly what I've found, is that when you can open up the space for people's experiences, they actually then lead themselves into their own transformation, as opposed to putting you as the key to their transformation. It's almost like the industry, because we are these quote unquote coaches and leaders and experts, we've been kind of indoctrinated to believe that we then have to be on a pedestal, that we then have to shed the light and show people the way. But what if the truth is, all we have to do is just open up the way and trust that people will get there however way they will get there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say I agree that people and communities just do know best. Right? Just specifically talking about their lived experience and the saviorism of coming in from the outside with some sort of critique and solution doesn't seem to go over so well for good reason. It's insulting and offensive. That's me being really blunt, but I think that's often how it then is experienced. It's insulting and offensive. And just that, to just being in the space of, I think the questioning also allows for them, like being in a state of like constantly learning, right? If I'm constantly questioning, why are things happening this way? And what does that mean? And who does that serve? And all of that, then an engagement, even as a coach, right? In that way is to sort of be in the, I think it can be quite playful, the playfulness of curiosity in not knowing everything, and others knowing best what they need for their own lives, and what a tremendous privilege it is to companion others in that. It deeply remains a privilege, and that's different than taking ownership of it. And in something like, say, birth, it can sometimes be physically clear, which can help a little with that, right? Which is, I can absolutely be here with you. I can support you in the ways that we've agreed to, in terms of what would work or feel good for you. And it's so clear, I actually can't give birth for you.
Yes.
I can't. I just can't. It's your birth. It's your body. It's your experience.
Well, and I was just thinking about, actually, right even before you said birth, I was thinking about you and your role as, a doula in supporting the birth of a baby, and how I would trust more a doula who came in with curiosity to my own process than to come in and be like, okay, here's the 5 steps to how you're going to give birth, and this is exactly how it's going to go. Because what if something goes wrong? What if something changes? What if my procedure doesn't align in those steps? If you're so adamant in teaching those steps, you actually miss being present with what I'm going through. So I'd much rather, and I would much more trust an individual who comes in off the pedestal, who comes in to listen, than to tell me what to do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would absolutely say it's my own philosophy involving birth. It was my own experience in giving birth, that it's what's most useful. And that it actually is what's respectful of another's humanity.
Yes.
That it even could be something that is put into steps is dehumanizing. to a
Mm.
degree, just because it takes away the actual intimacy of the connection and the experience as it's happening.
Yeah.
Doesn't education doesn't have its place, learning options, all of those things, specifically within birth, and then I would say even more broadly. I'm absolutely a proponent of it. And to say that a significant human experience can be pared down in a reductionist way towards 5 steps, I find to be untrue. I think it
Yeah.
takes away our humanity. And it also, going back to what you had touched upon a bit earlier, it also opens the door wide towards victim blaming,
Yes.
right? Which is another form of saying, yeah, just that. Like if I set the standards and then you don't meet them, and then I will now blame you for the experience that you had, even though I may have participated in the system that actually harmed.
Yeah.
If you then didn't get the birth that you wanted, it's because you failed, as opposed to birth goes how it goes.
Yeah. Well, and that's how I was perpetuating harm. You know, I was teaching certain systems and certain techniques like manifestation and law of attraction, you know, and all of the ways that you can succeed in making money, while it not only was it not working for me, but I was feeling deeply broken because it wasn't working for me. And I share this quite openly because, you know, I see how the concepts is structured so that if you doubt it, that's why it's not working. And so you have to put blind faith in something. You cannot question it. You have to trust it fully. And if it's not working, it's not because the system is not working or because people are vastly complicated. It's because you're not believing enough in yourself. And so it feeds right into abandonment wound and trauma, and it feeds right into the deep existential crisis that I think a lot of humans have. And so how can we succeed with that? How can we flourish with that? And yet that's what I'm so disheartened to see in our industry happen again and again and again.
Mm-hmm. No, yeah, it's to be quite powerful. And even in that, right, we were speaking of earlier, like in any space, and one of the questions that I always ask is there space for dissent?
Yeah.
Where are the dissenting voices, and are they allowed to serve a place of belonging or a seat at the table?
Mm.
If they're not, that's a big red flag for me.
Yes.
Which
Yes. Oh,
doesn't
pause.
mean,
Pause.
yeah,
I need that to like really land, because I think that that is absolutely. Look at Trump. There is no space for dissent in our government. There is no space to say you're not doing it right. He's completely closed off to it, and so we can see that manifest in so many different
absolutely,
ways
yeah,
in the spiritual coaching, self-development, self-help industry. Which is, if you're questioning me, I'm just a mirror, honey.
right.
I'm just a mirror to your own shit. And that is so harmful.
Mhm. It's harmful, and then even in it, it requires then conformity, yeah, which is like absolutely, I see it happening at the highest levels in the government in the states right now, and it doesn't mean no one's required to agree, right? If someone's dissenting, I think there's a lot of space to say, actually, that's not what I believe, or that's not my orientation, or that's not where I come from. This is how I work. This is how I got there. And if we're talking about, especially like larger ideas or community, larger spaces, then like there needs to be space for dissent, and someone still gets to belong.
Mm.
Uh, and in that, I think there's two pieces to it, which is I'm always curious, like, is there a level of conformity, and if anyone dissents, they just magically disappear
Yeah.
and they're not invited anymore? And then like, oh, that's a concern for me. And likewise, to me, so then what I seek, right, in the spaces I'm in, is do we have space for consent, and is that all, for dissent, and is that also happening in a context of consent, which we also agree to really take responsibility when we do harm, right? So there also, you can say, like, well, I'm just being the voice of dissent and I don't agree with you, da 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 da, and done in a certain way can absolutely violate others as well, right?
Yes.
So the voice that says, I have a question, I don't agree, I don't see that the same way, can we talk about this differently? I think there desperately needs to be space for that. And likewise, I would say hand in hand with it, if what you're saying, if what you're doing, if someone absolutely comes to you and says it is harmful and it's harmful to me in these ways, immediately the response is, okay, and I believe you.
Yes.
And then do what you want and will with that, but do it with full responsibility.
Yeah.
That the impact is very clear now.
Yeah.
So I understand the nuance and the complexity of it, but wherever, whether it be in the coaching community or manifestation, whenever it's required compliance, I think we always need to be asking who that actually serves and protects.
Yes. So you've been an entrepreneur for quite some time now. Where have you seen the most amount of violation of consent in the entrepreneurial space?
It's an interesting question, because I would say yes, I absolutely have been. I've been self-employed. I tend to not use the word entrepreneur for myself, simply because I've always been clear that actually I just want to be self-employed. I don't want a whole thing.
Yeah.
And that's just, it really is. It's like I just want self-employment, and I want some of the freedom and flexibility that is offered, specifically as it related to parenting for me. So I've not been in, to be fully transparent, with other, what I would call, who are in that sort of culture, and like, how do we do this and how do we market this? And been in a lot of those spaces. I've oftentimes just done my own thing. A lot of my work has actually been local, in the city of Chicago, where I lived for many years, and then some online. So what you're referencing, I would feel like I know more about than I have participated in. So full transparency there. I will say some of what I see or have witnessed in those spaces is absolutely certain dominant voices, and then those get upheld. And what we are exactly talking about, which is that when those are questioned, and or when someone comes in and says this is harmful, and this is why, that those voices are quickly shown the door and incredibly gaslit, as you were saying, by saying it's because you're not doing it correctly. And there's just a lack of transparency around all of it. That I've witnessed, that I do find to be harmful, in the sort of blaming the victim piece of it, which is, it's actually quite hard. Working is hard. Live within capitalism. It's really violent itself, and certain aspects are often not acknowledged. And I wouldn't say that's a violation of consent. I would say it's a violation of transparency, and it's one that supports authoritarian culture, which is a piece of to shift from that into and really creating a culture of consent. Which is just that. I'm going to present all of this and not actually acknowledge that there's another person at home who's working full time. That's how I have this house. That I got a good payout from my divorce. That's how I started my business. That I went into massive debt writing my book, whatever it is, it's not spoken of and then presented as if I actually arrived here by doing it the right or correct way. So if you haven't, I have a problem with that, and I do think it can be quite harmful. And assumptions, I would say big time, in terms of the assumptions that it makes around people and around what the experience of being human is.
Yeah, I really hear that. And I see a lot, in when we're talking about consent and we're talking about rape culture, it tends to go towards, well, men, violate women's spaces. And while that is true, and there's definitely space for that conversation, when I want to enter into where women violate other women's spaces, and because we don't know any different, we've seen this to be the way that is acceptable for us to be treated, and so now we are kind of treating each other the same way. And how have you seen that women disrespect the sovereignty or agency of others? Like, what have you seen? You engage in a lot of this conversation, and you have a really active community that you're constantly talking with. So I'm curious what you've seen there.
I would say I have seen it. I would say my mind goes a couple places. And the first is that we actually violate our own consent. And I
Oh,
would say that
yes.
oftentimes it starts there. So yeah, absolutely. When we're doing it to another, I think oftentimes it's because we are participating in something that harms us as well. And the violation of our own consent and playing by the rules.
Yeah.
And then gaslighting those who don't, and sort of the absolute conflict and tension that creates. The largest, I mean, I'll just be really straightforward, the largest way that I've seen it happen is ultimately just white supremacy and the ways that plays out.
Yeah.
And it shows up in terms of who are the voices that are listened to and specifically who is believed. And there's a lot of violence that has happened, continues to happen, absolutely intersects with the conversation on consent, and it's completely unacceptable in the destroying of others' humanity to me.
Yeah.
And it can be really subtle, and it can be incredibly stark. Both are true. But it plays out in that sort of violating of not hearing someone, not believing them, overriding them, and that we are all socialized to believe that that's acceptable behavior.
Yeah.
Just part of that rape culture piece, and that we earned it. Right? So like, oh, I'm here, and my voice should be centered most, and that is sometimes true, and it is by no means always true.
Yeah.
So if we're having a conversation about certain things, in particular, my voice should be, I should be present. My voice should not.
Yeah.
It should be in support. It should be in listening, which doesn't mean I shouldn't be there at all. I should absolutely, in a lot of contexts, be present. And also, I would even go further and say there are times and spaces where no, it's okay that you're not invited.
Yes.
That's okay too.
I don't know if that, I think we need to repeat that, because I don't know how often we hear that, but we need to hear that more and more, which is not every space in this world belongs to us.
Belongs to us, or I'll just speak for myself. Belongs to me is for me. I don't think that's a problem. I think it's actually powerful and a beautiful thing. Like, it's a deep piece of consent. Like, hear that was actually a boundary, and even respect, which is this piece that I sometimes feel is so missing from conversation and work around consent, which is that it can kind of have this like almost Debbie Downer sort of like feeling around it. Like, oh, it's not just that it's like so serious and heavy, but it's like always sort of like the voice that's like, wait a second, I think that sort of cliche around it. And to me, there's deep pleasure.
Yes.
And even joy, and I would use the word celebration, that is part of consent, because it really is to truly inhabit our own humanity.
Yes.
Just like I would love to see this culturally in how we hear and respond to no, and I would love for no to be celebrated.
Yes, I feel that, and I felt that to be so true in my life, that the more I've removed the socialization and the more I've done the decolonization and my own work of my own sovereignty, the more I can actually respect and uphold others, and I do not have to center, right? And I do not have to make people believe me without listening to them, you know? And it's been a really glorious, as you said, celebration. I've actually fell in love is about more with humanity the more I've awakened to the atrocities that we perpetuate as humans, because I've been able to really see and uphold human dignity as opposed to always making it be about me and my experience and my voice and who I am in the world. All right, so as we wrap up this conversation, I would love to know, in your own self-employment, What are some things that you make sure that you do, like maybe small practical things that you find yourself, or not you find yourself, that you actually purposefully do to honor the consent in others? And the reason why I ask this question is because I know there are a lot of women who listen to this podcast who are in their own business, who do their own thing, and we don't know what we don't know. So they may not even know the ways that adding people onto your list without actually getting their permission is a big form of violence. It's a form of dismantling their consent. So I'm curious for you, what have you seen to be true? What do you implement in your business to honor the consent of others?
Yeah, no, I think really simple. The one you mentioned is a great starting place, which is you can invite, and that's different than adding people. Don't add them to Facebook groups, don't add them to your mailing list. Really hear the no if there's an invitation extended, because of course, like if you think what you're doing is really cool, you want to invite them, and that's awesome. And it's not for everyone, and it's not for everyone all the time. And what does it mean to hear the no, and again, celebrate it, right? Like, rock on, this is like this person actually like having a boundary and knowing themselves. And like, that's what we're here to do. So like really celebrate that, as opposed to hearing no as the beginning of a negotiation. Which is, I hear no, and now let me convince you.
That's actually what I was trained.
Yeah, I believe that. I think it's a big part of the culture.
Yes.
And no is actually the end of a conversation.
Yes.
And the appropriate response to no in that context is thank you.
Yes.
Thank you for knowing yourself. Thank you for being clear with me, so that way I can fully respect you and what you need. Thank you. So really hearing when the answer is no to something, and honoring and celebrating it, as opposed to saying, well, what about this? Or except if you paid for it in this way, you'd still be able to. Or all the ways that can then play out, that I do think are manipulative and coercive.
Yes.
Towards others, and that sort of systematically wearing someone down that can happen is absolutely a consent issue, and even violation. So they're so exhausted that then they say yes by the end, even though it wasn't a yes that they came to from a place of integrity with themselves. So I think it can look that way in terms of really attuning the ear to having an ask specifically. What are you asking? Or in that, and what are you inviting someone into? Really hearing the no. Also really hearing the yes and celebrating that and being like, awesome, I'm super excited, right? Like when I'm offering someone and there are people who have a yes to it, I do think that's really exciting. Being clear too in terms of engagement, I think, is another really powerful way to do that. So someone can be really clear what they are saying yes to, is really helpful. Instead, and that's something I'm constantly learning on. There's just a learning curve of it. Sometimes I think I'm being clearer than I am.
Yeah.
And someone asks a question and I'm like, oh, I guess I didn't explain that. Right? Like, oh, okay, thank you for the question. Let me go clarify now, because others might not know as well. But as much as possible, being transparent in that way, so others know what it is that they would be saying yes to, and can have a clear yes to it. And then in terms of working one-on-one with people, and from that space, for those who are coaches and healing professions and all of those things, I think being mindful of, or being aware in the moment of interacting with those you work with, that no one's required. So again, it's just that socialization piece. Sometimes it'll even be as subtle as the assumption and belief that healing is always best. Might be one that's really prevalent. And that might be something that an individual is seeking. It's like, okay, then like, how can I support you in that? How can I be in that with you? But the larger normative values that we place upon ourselves and others, as opposed to really checking in and saying, is this actually what you want?
Yeah.
You are allowed to not want to heal. You are allowed to want to do something else instead. Those pieces, I think, are also, and that's a continual process, I would say, when working with others, and really checking in with both ourselves and others over, same as having sex with someone. Is this what you want to be doing?
Yes. Yeah, I was trained that people don't know how to make the best decisions for them, because if they did know how to make the best decisions for them, they would have what they want.
Mm.
So the fact that they don't have what they want shows that they don't know how to get what they want. And so my role in the sales conversation is to be a stand for them, to stand for what they want. By, if they say no, what I'm really hearing is this is what I was taught, right? If someone says no, or someone says I don't know, what I should be hearing in the sales conversation is, I need your help. I'm getting in my way. I don't know how to make the right decision for me. I know.
Mm-hmm.
Now I think back to that, and my heart it just shatters that was what I was taught, and I believed that I was doing the right thing for people. And what I see now is that what changed, what I shifted, the underlying belief that I shifted, is actually people know what the fuck they're doing, you know? People know what they're doing. They know how to make good decisions for them. Who am I to make a decision for anybody? And if they want me, I'm here. I will be happy to support them. But if they're a don't know, great, take time. If it's a don't know, take time to figure it out. And if it's a no, amazing. And that's it. Like you said, period. Because if you think about it in sex, right, Isabel, I wouldn't want my partner to hear my no as, I need to be convinced why I should have sex with that person.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I actually kind of like for us as coaches to be thinking about our business and thinking about our relationship with an individual as if we're inviting them to have sex. And how would we speak to that person if we were selling them sex? You know, if we were selling them this intimate experience? I think that would really change the way we relate to one another.
Absolutely, it would, right? Because I think we would perhaps then be sensitive to the ways that we're attempting to talk someone into something.
Yeah.
As opposed to asking, inviting, and hearing a yes or no. And I would hope at least that it would also shift it into the sense of it being a living thing, or a constantly fluid, fluctuating thing.
Yeah.
That there's a yes, and there's a yes in context, and it is not necessarily, again, being clear on what the agreement is. If we're talking about a business thing, like, this is what I'm offering, and being clear on the boundaries of that. This is what I can do and can't do. But that someone might have a yes, and then again, that it's a living thing that we're constantly exploring and knowing for ourselves, that sometimes it's easier to hold if we think of it as sex.
Yeah.
Think of it in a sexual context, as you were saying, which is, I might be like, yeah, I really am, that's a yes for me. And then 2 days later, I'm like, it's a no for me right now.
Yeah.
For any number of reasons.
Yeah.
And we would hopefully, right, respect that. And I do think it absolutely extends so far beyond sex to a very way of engaging with others.
Yeah. I love that. Any final thoughts on consent that we didn't maybe touch on that you wanna speak on?
Oh, I feel like we've explored so much.
Yes, we did.
And so no, I don't think I want to put more out there. I would just say that I think it is itself a living thing. And so even absolutely, we can give it a definition and explore deeply what it looks like in different contexts and different environments, and just being aware that, to me, anyways, it's actually about being human.
Yes.
And so to be human and to stay human means that we are also constantly changing. And so holding the conversation itself as big enough to hold all of that.
Yes. Thank you so much, Isabel, for your insights. I really appreciate you sharing your divine wisdom with our community.
Thank you.
Isabel and I had a lot of thoughts around consent, and now we want to hear yours. Come hang out with us on Instagram and Facebook. You can find Isabel at Isabel Faith Abbott on Facebook, and on Instagram at Isabel_Abbott. And you can find me at I am Thais Sky. And if you want to check out more of Isabel's work, go to www.isabelabbott, that's ABBOTT.com. And as always, you can learn more about me and my work at www.thaissky.com. See you next week.